5 or 6 year long story. So I did actually have to write stuff down. By the way, this is titled Tears in the Sand. That doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm going to be talking about. Ronan asked for a title, and I told him that it sounded epic. So here's Tears in the Sand, I guess. This is actually, like he said, this is the second one of these that I did. At the first one, I talked about how I was I guess the word I used was class terrorist. Chalkbeat was there. And they said that. They said this guy was a class terrorist. And I had a fun conversation explaining to my mom why my face was in a newspaper next to the word terrorist. It's my fault. I said that. I own that. It was just a fun conversation explaining to my military family. So, but if you were at that last one, I talked about a student who loved to dance that reminded certain people of me, not me, but certain people. This student actually, or these two students, actually come from that same class. It was an all-star class. That was my first year teaching. So there's a lot of stories from my first year teaching because I was not a good teacher my first year. So this student, his name was Gary. Gary is, or was, okay, I don't want to say was, it makes it sound like he's not alive. He's still alive. Gary is a short, light-skinned boy with an afro that makes his head look probably 3 or 4 times bigger than it was. Gary is not his real name. Katie Johnson decided she was going to bring students here. So now I have to change names to protect the identity so I don't break any FERPA laws. So, right from the very beginning, Gary, I thought was going to be a problem. So I was teaching 5th grade. I had just gotten back from Institute, which is TFA's training mechanism for new teachers. And I had learned all these cool songs and chants, and I was told that 5th graders like to do those things. Gary had other ideas. Gary did not do any chants. Whenever we did a chant or a dance, Gary would literally stare blank, right, just straight. He wouldn't do anything. He wouldn't acknowledge that other people were doing things. He wouldn't move. He would make no effort. So pretty much right away, I braced myself for a year of that. But thankfully that really wasn't the case. Gary was actually pretty high academically. He was weird as all get out. I'll just be honest. I love him, but he was strange. He never talked. He didn't really have very many friends, but he completed all his work, and as long as you didn't ask him to chant, sing, or dance, or anything like that, he was fine. We did almost have a falling out one time. It was probably the second week of school, and I had assigned a research project. Now, why I assigned 5th graders a solo research project the second week of school, it was my first year teaching, and I was so I go back to the computer, I'm checking on his research, and instead of doing research, he is looking up pictures of Dragon Ball Z characters. He's looking up Goku. Now, if you don't know anything about DBZ, it's a Japanese cartoon. Goku is the protagonist of this show, and I'm a fan of this show. So much so that, well, I guess you can just go ahead and tell them, me and my significant other are actually going to name our first son Goku. Yeah, we're very excited. So, she lost the bet, so that's what we have to do. Or we may also have a girl. I mean, but it still works. Goku is a
She's not pregnant.
She's not pregnant. So anyway, that was Gary. We bonded over our love of Japanese animation the whole year. Now, there's another student involved in this story, but I'll also change his name for purposes. His name is Marion. Marion is the polar opposite of Gary. He is long, lanky, brown skin with dreads. And he was a class clown, class jester, whatever you want to call him. He was a lot of things. A good student was not one of the things that he was. Marion never completed an assignment. And if you had the audacity to suggest to him that maybe he should do his work, then he would get mad at you like you had just slighted him. I did make an attempt to reach out to him this one time. I was talking about my childhood, and I was talking about bubble tape. You guys remember bubble tape?
Yeah.
And he had never seen it. I guess they don't sell it in a lot of places anymore. It's not as popular as it used to be. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna get this dude some bubble tape. So I go out. I get Marion 5, packs of bubble tape. So I hand it to him in the morning. I'm like, hey, this isn't bubble tape. These are Tic Tac things. But I hand it to him in the morning, and I'm like, here, you were talking about bubble tape. He's like, I got you some. And he looks at it. He opens up one of the packs. He smells it. And then he bites into the side of it. Yeah. He bites into the side of it like a damn Philistine or something. So I took it back. I took all the bubble tape back. Because, you honestly just can't help people like that. You try and do stuff with people and then they do stuff like that. So, we didn't have a good relationship. He used to always make fun of people, and he made fun of me a lot. He used to make fun of the way I walk. I walk out-toned. I try and hide it. It's really good for ballet. I have really good turnout. It's not good for anything else. So I was used to people making fun of it, but still, it bothered me. So this is where the story gets interesting. I'm trying to figure out how to deal with Marion, because Marion is quite honestly a culture killer. So I think I'm at, what is that place in, I hate this place. Brothers in Rockville. And I'm with all of the other first year teachers, and we're commiserating, having pissing contests about who has the worst students. Everybody thinks they do. And one of the teachers who, quite honestly does not work in the same environment, so really doesn't have a whole lot to contribute, is drinking heavily. I don't drink, but he was drinking a lot. He was drinking Grey Geese. That's what it's called when you drink multiple shots of Grey Geese. Also known as a gaggle. So he had a gaggle of vodka. But in his drunken stupor, he actually suggests a pretty good idea. He's like, you keep talking about this Marion kid. Why don't you pair him up with that weird kid you're always talking about? And I'm just thinking, Gary, Marion. All right, let's do it. So the next day I go in, I move their seats next to each other in homeroom and in social studies, because I was lucky enough to have them both. And I thought that I would meet resistance, but I didn't. They actually became pretty quick friends. Now, ideally, what happens when you pair two students up is that they rub off on each other. So what I was hoping would happen is that Gary would rub off on Marion, because I could use Marion, A, doing his work, but B, it'd be great if he was quiet sometimes. But that's not what happened. Instead, Marion rubbed off on Gary. And all of a sudden, Gary turned into this charismatic, social butterfly, enterprising young man. I didn't move their seats because Gary had trouble making friends, and his mom called me the day before I was going to move and was like, I don't know what you did, but he's so much happier. So now I can't even move him. So whatever. They get to sit together. It's fine. So they became friends, and they pretty much stayed friends. it became kind of an issue though. So by year 2, they were already scamming people. Gary had somebody in his family who worked at a store, and he would come in with these huge bags of Takis. And they would essentially bribe kids to do things for the Takis. If you're unfamiliar with what a Taki is, it is a type of spicy corn chip that can only be consumed by middle schoolers. So if you ever see them, do not try either. Additionally, it serves as the dominant form of currency in Indianapolis Middle School. And 2012, let's just say, was a great year for the Indianapolis Middle School economy. I think the exchange rate from Takis to dollars was like 2 to 1. So we'll just say that Marion and Gary were having their run of the school. By the way, if that ever happens to you, the trick is just to introduce more Takis into the economy. That's the value of the currency. That's what you do. So yes, I'm the one who caused the Great Taki Depression of 2012. It had to be done. I had to teach. But, and this is where the story gets a little bit more serious. As you've probably been able to gather from the story, I was not the biggest fan of Marion. So I had a hard time connecting with him, and that really frustrated me because that's kind of why I got, into it. And I'll be honest, like, a lot of it's my fault, my arrogance. Like, I'm a pretty arrogant person. I feel really good about myself really easy. But then also, like, I'll just go ahead and throw this out there. When people recruit you to teach and they tell you, like, oh, you'll get to teach people who look like you, they gas you and and they're going to care so much and they're going to be so happy to have a teacher who looks like them. I can tell you unequivocally that Marion didn't give a damn. I look like him. So Marion still frustrated me, and he was friends with Gary, and I had liked Gary before, but now Marion was making that more difficult. Marion was also in a gang. And Gary wasn't into that type of thing before he met Marion, but as I started to overhear their lunchroom conversations, I realized that, like, Marion was kind of putting Gary onto some things that maybe he shouldn't be putting him onto. So I started spying more and more. And it got to the point where I actually started intercepting this is like 3 years later, their G-chats, because everybody at KIP gets a Google address. So I saw some of the things they were talking about. I saw some of the things that they were Google searching. And they were things like how to get this gun, how to hotwire this car, how to do this, how to do that. And it was distressing, to say the least. I did overhear them talking one day at lunch, and they didn't know that I heard this. But they were openly talking about going to an area and robbing people. So I decided at this point, like, okay, I need to intervene. So I'm thinking that what I'm going to do before I call, the police or the authorities and parents and things like that, I'm going to try and have one more heart-to-heart, try and make that profound additional impact that Teach for America promised me that I'd be able to make. And I called them both into my room. And at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about myself because, I got to play detective. I figured out I solved something before it happened. So I'm all, I'm on 10. I call them in there. I know I was cussing because I had that kind of relationship. I'm like, you all think that you're so smart. You think nobody's going to figure this shit out? You think I didn't know what you guys are up to? And I just started reading back all the stuff that I heard them say because I was writing it down over the course of a week. And it turns out that they were talking about playing Grand Theft Auto on the internet. They just thought that, lucky for me, they weren't offended. They just thought it was the funniest thing that's ever happened to them. And what I realized in that interaction was that I was really the one that was in the wrong. I had let I'll just go ahead and say it, extreme dislike for Marion cloud my judgment about the character that he had. And this wasn't even something that crossed my mind at the time, but as I reflected on it when I wrote down things, what if I had called the police or something? What if I had called even a parent and put these ideas in their parents' head and projected, quite honestly, my stereotypical view of Marion that I didn't like onto other people? So this is basically just to say that, sometimes your students surprise you. Your first impression and the way kids are isn't necessarily the way that they'll end up. And it took me 5 years of Marion, because he did a victory lap. But it took me 5 years of Marion to realize that. And I thought that I was going to be the one, that made a difference in him. And maybe I did. But really, he was the first student I had that taught me that I really shouldn't judge books by the cover. That's the end of the story. I do have one question. If this has nothing to do with what we just talked about. If you are playing Uno, and one person puts a draw 2 down, and the next person puts down a draw 2, the person after that has to draw 4, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.